My son called me at 3:15 inches the morning, his voice so broken I almost didn't recognize it. Dad, please, please come get me. I can't stay here. When I arrived at the Hartwell estate in Muskoka, Eleanor Hartwell stood in the doorway like she owned the world, because she believed she did. She looked at me and said, "Connor is receiving care. He is not leaving this property." I stepped forward. She didn't move. So I moved her. When I found my son in that locked room, what I saw on his arms told me everything I needed to know. I was too late to stop what had been done to him, but I was not too late to burn it all down. As a parent, if you arrived at that door and someone told you your child wasn't leaving, what would you do? I need to know. Tell me in the comments. My name is Robert MacKenzie. I'm 67 years old, and I spent 31 years as an investigative journalist, first at the Edmonton Journal, then freelancing for outlets across the country. I covered everything from residential school settlements to pharmaceutical fraud to political corruption in 3 different provincial governments. My wife used to say I had a nose for rot. She wasn't wrong. She also used to say I needed to know when to come home. She was right about that too, and I learned it too late. Margaret died 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and brutal, the way it always is. The hospital handled the diagnosis well. They handled the treatment competently. But during her final weeks, something went wrong with her pain management, and when I tried to get answers, I was told to speak with patient relations. Patient relations told me to speak with the attending physician. The physician told me the dosage records were confidential. Margaret died in more pain than she should have. I never stopped wondering why. That wondering turned into a 7-part series that resulted in a Ministry of Health audit and 3 disciplinary hearings. It didn't bring Margaret back, but it felt like something. My son Connor was 32. He worked in landscape architecture, spent his summers designing waterfront properties around Georgian Bay. He'd met Sophie Hartwell at a charity event in Toronto 4 years earlier. I tried to be happy for him. Sophie was kind, genuinely warm, not the problem. The problem was the family she came from. The Hartwells owned Cedarbrook Wellness Centers, 4 private facilities across Ontario that charged between $15,000 and $25,000 a month for what they called integrated recovery programs, addiction treatment, mental health support, executive burnout therapy. The brochures showed cedar-lined common rooms and kayaking on pristine lakes. Their Muskoka location sat on 40 acres of old-growth forest overlooking a private bay. Everything about it looked legitimate. Everything about it felt wrong to me from the first time Connor mentioned it. I told him once that I'd seen their billing practices mentioned in a provincial audit. He told me I saw corruption everywhere. He wasn't entirely wrong, but he wasn't entirely right either. I backed off. Told myself he was an adult. Told myself Margaret's voice in my head telling me to trust him was the right instinct. For 2 years, I backed off. Then my phone lit up at 3:15 inches the morning with his name on the screen. Dad. His voice was a whisper, tight and desperate, like he was trying not to be heard. Dad, I need you to come get me. I'm at Cedarbrook. I can't stay here. I sat up straight. What's happening? Are you hurt? I don't know. He paused. I can't think right. I've been trying to think straight for days, and I can't. Please just come. Don't tell anyone where you're going. I'll be there in 2 hours. I heard a door open on his end. The line went dead. I was dressed and in my truck in 4 minutes. Highway 400 north out of Barrie was empty at that hour. The drive through Muskoka at night is beautiful in a way that doesn't comfort you when your son's voice is replaying in your head, frantic and foggy. I pushed the speed limit the entire way. I knew where Cedarbrook's Muskoka property was. I'd driven past the entrance once, 2 years ago, when Connor first mentioned it. Long gravel driveway set back from a township road. Wrought iron gate with a cedar post sign. The kind of entrance that told you money lived here and preferred not to be disturbed. I pulled up to the intercom at the gate at just past 5 in the morning. Before I could press anything, the gate swung open. They knew I was coming. The driveway lights were all on. I drove slow, watching the tree line on both sides. I'd spent 30 years learning what it meant when people were too prepared for you. The main building was a converted lodge, 3 stories of timber and glass overlooking the water. A woman was standing on the front steps before I'd fully stopped the truck. Eleanor Hartwell. I'd met her at the wedding and twice after. She was in her mid-60s, silver hair always perfectly set, The kind of posture you only get from a childhood where someone reminded you to stand up straight every single day. Robert. Her voice was warm and completely empty of warmth at the same time. It's very early. I know what time it is. Connor called me. I'm here to see him. She didn't step aside. Connor is in the middle of a therapeutic process. He reached out to you during a moment of distress. That's actually part of the cycle we're working through. It wouldn't be appropriate for you to see him right now. It would set back weeks of progress. I stared at her. Move. This is a private medical facility. You don't have authority here. He's my son. He's my son-in-law, and he's under our care. She folded her hands. He is not leaving. The way she said it. Flat. Absolute. Like it wasn't even a question. I stepped back and drove my boot into the door just below the handle. The frame cracked. I hit it again and it swung open hard. Eleanor stumbled backward into the foyer. I heard her shouting behind me as I moved past her into the building. A staff member appeared from a side hallway, and I walked straight past him too. Where is he? Connor's room was on the second floor. I'd heard his voice above me. I took the stairs and started checking doors, knocking, listening. The third door on the right. I heard breathing, low and labored. Connor. I knocked hard. It's Dad. Dad. Barely audible. Dad. The door was locked. A privacy latch, not a deadbolt. I took 2 steps back and put my shoulder into it. The frame gave faster than I expected, and I nearly fell into the room. He was sitting on the floor beside the bed. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not on the bed. On the floor. Knees pulled up. Back against the mattress. He looked like he'd slid down and not had the strength to get back up. His face was gray. Not pale the way a person gets when they're tired, but a kind of gray that means something is wrong inside the blood, inside the body's chemistry. He'd lost weight since I last saw him 6 weeks earlier. His eyes took a moment to find me. Dad. He reached out one hand. I crossed the room and got down on the floor beside him. I've got you. I'm here. Are you hurt? I don't know. I keep getting confused. He lifted his arm to rub his face, and that's when I saw them. His forearm. A pattern of small round marks, some scabbed, some still red, tracking up from his wrist in 2 neat rows. The same distance apart, each one. Not accidental, not self-inflicted. Deliberate and repeated. My vision narrowed. My chest locked up. I had to breathe through my nose twice before I could speak. How long has this been happening? He looked at his own arm like he was seeing it for the first time. I don't know. I stopped sleeping. Then they gave me something to help me sleep, and after that I stopped knowing what day it was. Can you stand? I think so. I got him upright. He leaned against me. He was thin enough that I could feel his shoulder blade like a folded piece of cardboard. We moved into the hallway. Eleanor was at the top of the stairs with a man I recognized as her son-in-law's younger brother, Thomas, and a large security staff member. Sophie was nowhere. I found out later she'd been kept in a separate wing and told Connor had checked himself in voluntarily. Robert, you cannot remove him. He's a danger to himself. The marks on his arm are not self-inflicted. I'm taking him. Thomas stepped in front of me. You've broken into a medical facility, assaulted a staff member. You need to think very carefully about your next move. My next move is walking out this door with my son. Then I'm going to speak to the OPP. And then I'm going to speak to every journalist I know, which is most of them. Thomas looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at me with the particular expression of someone calculating how much this was going to cost them. I walked past both of them and down the stairs. The security man moved aside. In the parking lot, I got Connor into the passenger seat, buckled him in, and drove out through the gate. He drifted in and out of consciousness during the drive south. I kept talking to him. What season do you think it is? Who won the Leafs game last week? What did you have for breakfast? Simple. We've documented the injuries. We've documented everything. That's what I was already telling myself. Even then, 31 years of muscle memory. Southlake Regional in Newmarket admitted him just after 7 in the morning. The triage nurse looked at his arms and didn't say anything, just took us back fast. A physician saw him within 20 minutes. She emerged from behind the curtain to speak with me while a second nurse stayed with Connor. She was direct. The kind of direct you want from a doctor at 7 in the morning. Your son has 3 substances in his system that shouldn't be there together. A benzodiazepine, quetiapine, which is an antipsychotic, and a third compound we're still identifying. Together, the combination suppresses memory formation, increases confusion and suggestibility, and creates a physiological dependency within 10 to 14 days. The track marks indicate repeated intravenous administration. I gripped the edge of the chair I was standing beside. Someone did this to him? I can't make that determination. What I can tell you is that his own prescription record, which we've pulled from his family physician in the city, shows none of these medications. We're required to notify police when we see evidence consistent with non-consensual administration. She paused. We'll have a detective here within the hour. The detective who arrived was named Sergeant Carol Finlayson, OPP. She had the manner of someone who had worked rural Ontario long enough to not be impressed by money or addresses. She took my statement for 45 minutes and did not interrupt me once. When I finished, she closed her notebook and was quiet for a moment. Mr. MacKenzie, I have to tell you something. Cedarbrook has come across my desk before. Complaints from families of former residents. 3 of those complaints went nowhere because the witnesses recanted or the paperwork wasn't sufficient. One of those files has a notation that the local detachment commander has a personal relationship with the Hartwell family. She let that sit. I've been quietly building a case for 8 months in coordination with the Provincial Health Fraud Unit. What happened to your son, if we can prove intent, moves this from a health regulation matter to criminal charges. Forcible confinement, assault causing bodily harm. But what I need is a pattern. Evidence of systematic conduct, not a single incident. Tell me what you need. She looked at me steadily. I may need your help to get it. They arrested Thomas and Eleanor Hartwell that afternoon on preliminary charges. They were out on bail by 6 o'clock with a legal team that probably cost more per hour than most people make in a month. By evening, the family's public relations firm had put out a statement describing Connor as a patient in voluntary crisis treatment and describing me as an unstable father-in-law who had assaulted a medical staffer and removed a vulnerable man against medical advice. I sat in my truck in the hospital parking lot and read it on my phone. Then I called my former editor at the Journal, a man named Gerald Price, who had worked with me for 16 years. I need you to help me find everything on the Hartwells. Financial records, regulatory filings, any complaints that were scrubbed, former staff who left under unusual circumstances. Everything you can find. Give me 24 hours. I spent the night in a waiting room chair and the next morning started making calls. I'd covered healthcare fraud before. I knew how to read Ministry of Health licensing records. I knew which ombudsman databases were searchable. What I found in the first 12 hours made me sit very still for a long time. Cedarbrook's 4 facilities had a combined annual revenue of just over $40 million, much of it flowing through private insurance billing and OHIP reconciliation claims for programs that were either inflated or, in some cases, appeared to have been billed for services never rendered. That was the financial layer. The human layer was worse. 39 former residents had died within 1 year of leaving Cedarbrook facilities in the past 6 years. Several had died while still enrolled. The provincial coroner's records listed causes ranging from accidental overdose to cardiac events. But the clustering was wrong. The timing was wrong. Too many deaths too close to the moment a patient had either complained or attempted to leave early. Gerald called me back on the second morning. There's a name that keeps coming up in the former employee records. A nurse practitioner named Diana Walsh. She worked at the Muskoka location for 2 years before she was terminated. She filed a wrongful dismissal complaint with the Labor Relations Board, then withdrew it 3 months later. The withdrawal was accompanied by a confidentiality agreement. Standard NDA language. Then 6 months after that, she died. They ruled it a drowning. Georgian Bay. November. I know. People swim in Georgian Bay in November sometimes, Gerald. Ice fishermen fall in. But a nurse practitioner going for a swim in November alone. I found her next of kin listed in an obituary. A brother named Patrick Walsh, Collingwood. I sent him a message through a community Facebook group that had shared her memorial post. I introduced myself and told him I was investigating Cedarbrook and believed his sister had tried to expose something important. He called me within 2 hours. His voice was flat in the way that grief gets after 2 years of not being resolved. I've been waiting for someone to ask, he said. Tell me about Diana. She was meticulous. That's the first thing you should understand. She kept records of everything. She called me 6 weeks before she died. She was scared. She said she'd documented things at that facility that she was going to take to the College of Nurses and the ministry. She'd been threatened with defamation action if she spoke publicly. She told me she had copies of everything somewhere safe. 2 days before she died, she sent me a text. It just said, "The ones who can't speak for themselves deserve someone to speak for them." She always said things like that. Did she tell you where she kept the copies? He was quiet for a long moment. She had a locker at the aquatic center in Collingwood. She used to swim competitively. She rented a storage locker there for years, kept her extra equipment. She gave me a spare key the last time I saw her, told me it was just in case. I never knew what she meant. I was too afraid to look. I didn't want to believe it was as bad as she was saying. Another pause. "Can you come to Collingwood?" I drove there the next morning. The aquatic center was a municipal facility, the kind that smells of chlorine and industrial rubber, a smell I associate with Connor's competitive swimming years when he was a teenager. Patrick met me in the parking lot. Quiet man, early 50s, wore a work jacket with a plumbing company logo on the chest. He shook my hand and didn't say much on the walk inside. The locker was a full-sized athletic locker near the back of the equipment room. Patrick's key worked. Inside, a zippered duffel bag. Inside the bag, a sealed waterproof pouch, the kind kayakers use to protect electronics. Inside the pouch, 2 USB drives, a sealed envelope marked open if something happens to me, and a handwritten index on 3 pages listing every document on the drives by file name. I stood there in that equipment room and read the index slowly. Patient intake forms with diagnoses that had been altered after admission. Medication administration logs showing drugs given without corresponding physician orders. Internal emails between facility directors discussing residents who were described as difficult and in need of extended stabilization. Financial transfer records showing quarterly payments to a provincial health inspector, a regional ministry liaison, and 2 local elected officials. And one final category. Diana had labeled it simply, "The ones who couldn't leave." 11 names. Residents who had requested early discharge, or who had a family member request discharge on their behalf. All 11 had died within 90 days of that request. Diana had cross-referenced each death against the coroner's public records and documented the discrepancy between what the families were told and what the internal records suggested. She'd known she might not make it. She'd left this here anyway. For Patrick. For whoever came looking. Patrick sat down on a bench and put his head in his hands. I let him sit for a moment. "She saved these for a reason," I said finally. "Let's make sure it means something." I photographed every page of the index on my phone, then took the pouch and its contents directly to Sergeant Finlayson. She called the Health Fraud Unit. The Health Fraud Unit called the RCMP Financial Crime Division. Within 48 hours, I was sitting in a conference room in a federal building in Toronto with Finlayson, 2 RCMP investigators, and a Crown prosecutor named Jennifer Khalil, who had the kind of focused attention that made you understand she had never once lost track of a case in her life. The evidence Diana had left was strong, Khalil told me. Strong enough for warrants. Strong enough for a federal file, because the billing fraud crossed provincial boundaries and involved federal healthcare transfer payments. But to make the criminal charges stick at the highest level, to put Eleanor Hartwell and her associates in front of a jury with no avenue of escape, they needed to catch them committing a crime in real time. Diana's evidence showed the pattern. Finlayson's 8 months of quiet work showed the infrastructure. What they needed was one clear, documented, unambiguous act of forcible confinement that would nail the intent, not just the outcome. Khalil looked at me steadily across the table. "We have a former employee who reached out to your son's wife, Sophie, after the arrest. Her name is Marlene Chu. She worked at the Muskoka facility as a program coordinator for 18 months. She left before she could be silenced. She's willing to cooperate. She's willing to make contact with the Hartwells, present herself as a potential target, someone who can be lured back into the network. If they move to silence her or confine her, we have federal kidnapping jurisdiction. We can end this." Finlayson spoke carefully. "We'd need a second person with her, someone the Hartwells already know. Someone who makes them believe they have something to gain." I understood what she was saying before she finished the sentence. Connor had walked into the hospital in Newmarket with track marks on his arm and 3 foreign substances in his blood. He had now spent 6 days in treatment, the real kind, with physicians who were straightforward with him about what had been done to his body and what recovery would look like. He was clearer each day. He was angry in the specific way that people get when they understand they have been deliberately violated. When I brought Khalil's proposal to him, he didn't hesitate. "I want to do this." "No." I stood up from the chair beside his bed. "Absolutely not." "Dad." He looked at me with Margaret's eyes. "I mean that plainly." He has his mother's eyes, and sometimes it stops me cold. "Dad, you of all people cannot tell me to stay home when something this wrong is happening. You have been through enough. I know exactly what I've been through." "That's the point." He sat forward. "I know what they did. I know how it felt to not be able to think clearly, to wonder if what I was experiencing was real. I know there are other people in those facilities right now going through the same thing, and they don't have a father who knows what to look for." He paused. "Let me help fix it." I looked at him for a long time. I saw Margaret in him. Her refusal to sit quietly when something was wrong. Her belief that knowing a thing and doing nothing about it was its own kind of failure. I looked at Finlayson. If anything happens to him, nothing will happen to him. Tracking devices on both Marlene and Connor. 8-person surveillance team. RCMP tactical unit staged 12 minutes from the property. The moment anyone moves toward confinement, we move. 12 minutes is a long time. I know. She held my gaze. I've thought of nothing else for 2 days. We don't move unless we're certain it's controlled. I was 67 years old. I'd sent myself into difficult situations more times than I could count. I'd never sent my child. I told Connor to call me the moment he was inside. He hugged me at the door of the hotel room where we'd been staying. He was stronger than he'd been at the hospital. He was standing straight. "I'll call you," he said. He and Marlene drove together to a coffee shop in Bracebridge, where the initial contact had been arranged through an intermediary connected to the Hartwell network. I sat in a rental car with Finlayson 2 blocks away. At 7:45, my phone showed a photo taken from outside the coffee shop window. Connor and Marlene at a table. Someone watching them from the street. Then a text to my phone from a blocked number. "We've been expecting you both." Finlayson was already talking into her radio. My son was inside the net, and I was sitting in a car 2 blocks away, and every instinct I had, every reflex from 31 years of walking toward difficult things myself, was screaming at me to start driving. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs. "Trust the plan." I said it out loud. The call came 17 minutes later. Unknown number, male voice, controlled and cold. "Mr. MacKenzie, we have your son and Miss Chu at the Muskoka property. If you want a conversation, bring everything you've collected. Every document, every file, the drives. Come alone. Let me speak to him." A pause. Then Connor's voice, strained but steady. Dad, it's okay. I'm okay. Don't bring anything." The line was cut. Finlayson was already speaking to the tactical unit. "They're moving. Teams are going. David, the fake drives are in the bag in the back seat. You drive to the property. You go in. You give them the bag. The moment we hear the signal, we're 30 seconds behind you." She'd started calling me David by accident and hadn't corrected herself. I noticed it, but didn't say anything. I drove north for the second time, in 10 days, toward that long gravel driveway. The night was clear and cold, the kind of April night in Muskoka that reminds you winter hasn't entirely let go. The gate opened before I reached the intercom. Again, still expecting me, still certain they controlled this. A staff member walked me through the main building. The common areas were dark and empty. Past the reception desk, a door that required a key card. Downstairs into a lower level I hadn't seen before. The smell was different down here. Not the cedar and linen of the upper floors. Institutional. Antiseptic over something older. A large room, concrete floor under thin commercial carpet. Eleanor Hartwell stood near the back wall in a blazer and reading glasses, looking at the laptop bag I was carrying with the expression of someone concluding a transaction. Thomas stood to her right. 2 staff members flanked the door behind me. Connor and Marlene were seated in chairs with zip ties at their wrists. Connor looked up when I came in. He was calm. I knew from his eyes that the recording device was running. I held up the bag. "Here." Thomas checked the drives. He nodded at Eleanor. Eleanor removed her reading glasses and folded them into her jacket pocket. Here is what will happen, Robert. We'll take what you've brought, you and Miss. Chu will be escorted out and given a very clear understanding of what a defamation action looks like when it's brought by a family with significant resources. Your son will remain with us for the duration of his program, which we will extend given the complications of the past week. And you will find that every journalist you know has suddenly lost interest in this particular story. She said it calmly, the way you say things when you have said them many times before. You've done this before. Thomas smiled. You're a journalist. You know how things work. Some stories serve the public interest. Others serve private agendas. No one who matters will believe a man who broke into a medical facility twice and removed a patient in crisis. I looked at him. There's one thing you've miscalculated. He raised an eyebrow. I didn't come alone. The lights dropped. Emergency lighting clicked on across the ceiling in cold white. Then Eleanor's own voice began playing from somewhere overhead, a recording of the past 4 minutes in this room, clear and complete. Connor's wrists were cut free by his own hand. He'd worked the zip tie loose during the conversation. He stood and crossed to me. The door behind Thomas opened. Finlayson first, then RCMP Tactical in full gear, 6 officers, moving fast and completely certain. Eleanor Hartwell, Thomas Hartwell, the female voice of the Crown Prosecutor, came through a speaker connected to Finlayson's radio. You are under arrest for forcible confinement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and related offenses under the Criminal Code of Canada. You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay. Eleanor's face did something I hadn't seen it do before. It went very still, not composed. Still, the way things go still when the mechanism behind them has stopped. Thomas dropped the laptop bag. An officer had him against the wall in seconds. I stood with my arm around my son's shoulders while the room was secured around us. He looked at me. I told you I'd call. You did. Was it enough? I looked at Eleanor being led toward the door in handcuffs. Her posture finally uncertain. More than enough. The preliminary hearings began in June. The full trial commenced in October of the following year. I attended every sitting. 31 years of sitting in courtrooms prepared me for the tedium and the grief of it, the way justice moves slowly and without drama, the long hours of testimony and legal argument that don't look anything like they do on television. My documentary on Cedar Brook, assembled from 2 years of research and Diana Walsh's evidence, aired on a national streaming platform 2 weeks before jury selection. It was viewed 4 million times in Canada in the first 10 days. Families of former residents began contacting the victim advocacy group that Connor and Marlene had quietly established in the months since the arrest. By the time the trial concluded, 44 people had come forward. The verdicts were delivered on a Thursday in late November, a gray day, the kind that arrives in Ontario and stays for 6 months. Eleanor Hartwell, convicted on all counts. Forcible confinement, criminal fraud over $5,000. Conspiracy. Manslaughter in connection with 3 deaths where the Crown proved she had direct knowledge of conditions that caused the deaths. The judge sentenced her to 18 years with no eligibility for parole for 12. She stood and received it without expression. I watched her face and saw nothing, and understood that this was who she had always been. Thomas Hartwell, convicted, 14 years. The health inspector who had received quarterly payments from the Hartwells took a plea agreement. Returned all compensation received. 6 years in a federal institution. The ministry liaison resigned before charges were laid. A provincial investigation into his conduct continued. 2 Cedar Brook directors received sentences of 7 and 9 years respectively for their roles in the fraud and the medication administration program. The 4 Cedar Brook facilities were shut by court order. Licenses revoked. All assets seized. A victim compensation fund was established at $12 million through the asset forfeiture process. The provincial government announced a comprehensive review of private wellness facility oversight standards within a week of the verdicts. It was the kind of regulatory response that might have happened anyway. Eventually, years from now, without any of this. It happened now. Connor testified for 3 days. I sat in the gallery for every hour of it. He was precise and composed, and answered every question directly, including the ones that required him to describe in clinical terms what had been done to his body. Afterward, When he came out of the courthouse into the November cold, he put on his jacket and stood beside me for a moment without speaking. "You okay?" I asked. "I will be," he said. He meant it. 6 months later, he and Marlene organized a support group for survivors of coercive care facilities. They met twice a month in a community center in Barrie. I went to one session, sat in the back, listened to people describe things that had happened to them in places that had looked, from the outside, like help. Connor stood at the front and said nothing particularly eloquent. He just thanked them for coming and asked if anyone wanted to speak. And one by one, in a rented room in a community center on a Tuesday night, they did. I thought about Margaret during the drive home. Her last words to me at the hospital, the real ones, not the ones I've told people at dinner parties. The private ones, she said at 4 a.m. with the room dark and only the two of us. She'd taken my hand and said, "Robert, Connor needs you more than your work does. Always remember that." I'd gotten it wrong for a long time. I'd thought that meant being present, being available, answering the phone when he called. But it turned out it meant something more than that. It meant being willing to kick down the door, to drive 2 hours in the dark, to sit in a car 2 blocks from danger and trust your son to be brave enough to walk into it. It meant understanding that protecting someone doesn't always mean keeping them safe behind walls. Sometimes it means standing beside them when they choose to walk toward the thing that frightens them. A letter arrived at my house 3 weeks after the sentencing. Prison mail. Eleanor Hartwell's name and the return address. I opened it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. It said, "You have no idea what this family represents, what we've built, what we protect. You've destroyed something you couldn't possibly understand, and you will answer for it." I photographed it, front and back, sent copies to Finlayson, to Crown Counsel Khalil, and to the parole board file. Filed the original in my documentation cabinet. Then I turned to my desk, where a new folder had been sitting for 2 weeks. A family in British Columbia had reached out after seeing the documentary. Their mother had spent 4 months at a private care facility in the Okanagan. They couldn't get answers about her death. I'm 67 years old. My back hurts in the mornings, and I wear reading glasses now that I used to leave in the car because I hated the way they made me look. I sleep better than I have in years, and I think that's because I kept the promise I made to Margaret in the dark. Connor is safe. Connor is doing good work. Connor is helping other people find their way out of the kind of situation he was in, and the particular light that puts in a person's eyes is something I will carry for the rest of my life. And there are more people who need help, more families who cannot get answers, more facilities that have learned to make wrongdoing look exactly like care. So the folder on my desk will get opened, and I'll start making calls. And the work will continue. These stories I share are not entertainment. They are documentation. They are what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept that money and status put anyone beyond accountability. They are proof that one person, tired and frightened and far from perfect, can still hold a light in a very dark room. When you see something wrong, act. When your gut tells you something is being hidden, dig. Don't wait until the phone rings at 3 a.m. before you trust what you already know. I waited too long. I second-guessed myself because I didn't want to be wrong. Don't be like me. Be faster. Be braver. And always, always answer when your son calls.